Welcome back to the Vince Coglianese Show. Our overweight world leaders have some things to say to us.
And for scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. All this is entirely consistent with predictions and repeated warnings. The only surprise is the speed of the change. Climate change is here, it is terrifying, and it is just the beginning. The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
That's the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres this week saying you need to give him more power over your life. Here to talk about all of this, I want to bring in Steve Malloy. Steve Malloy is the E&E Legal Fellow and a former Trump-Pence EPA transition team member, and he joins us now. Hello, Steve. Good to talk to you again, sir.
Hey, Vince, thanks for having me back.
When you hear the UN Secretary General say that we're responsible for the hot temperatures we're experiencing now, you say what?
Well, he's quite the windbag. Look, we've, since 2014, almost 9 years now, there's been no global warming despite 500 billion tons of emissions. Now, we are told that every emission warms the planet. But over 9 years, 500 billion tons, no warming. It's summertime. Yeah, it's hot. It's hot in different places. And, desperate climate alarmists like Antonio Guterres, they want to use every, hot day as proof of global warming. It's just simply not true. The media has completely hyped all the heat waves in the United States. I mean, the fact is that June and July overall have been pretty cool in the United States. 75% of Americans living in cooler temperatures, only 25% in warmer temperatures. That's got nothing to do with emissions or climate change. But it's just called weather.
But I'm looking at headlines. I've got a mountain of headlines in front of me today that says July is the hottest month ever on record. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal at the beginning about, July 3rd, 4th is supposed to be the hottest days in 125,000 years. Of course, what the media didn't tell you is that, those claims were based on satellite data and computer models, neither of which we had 125,000 years ago. It was completely made up. The Biden administration ran away from those hottest day claims. They live on in the media because the media's mission is to scare everybody into believing in climate change, and there's no science behind any of it.
Yeah, and yet it endures. I remember that sometimes I've cited this a bunch, but sometimes a conservative will look at a very snowy day and say, "Boy, we could use some global warming right about now." And the reaction from the left is always to poo-poo that and say, "Well, weather isn't climate." They would say, "The weather isn't climate." I've noticed they don't use that anymore on a hot day.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that likes to torque them about that because the narrative has been that emissions are just going to boil the planet and it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and never stop. And of course, none of that has ever been true. June was the 35th anniversary of NASA scientist James Hansen's infamous testimony in the Senate, which launched what I call climate idiocy. And every claim he made was wrong. He even claimed that 1988 was going to be the hottest year ever. It wasn't. There is no climate prediction, no prediction of apocalypse that has ever come true. I repeat that all the time because it's true, because these people will not go away with their, junk science.
And yet, again, they endure. I mean, here's Karine Jean-Pierre saying this week that climate change is taking over our entire lives.
How do we move forward as climate change is taking over every part of our lives almost?
It's taking over every part of our lives. And I look around and I think, no, it's not climate change that's doing that. That's the government.
No, that's exactly right, Vince. The Biden administration has this all of government approach to climate. It's like their number one agenda issue on their agenda. And every agency, regardless of how remote they are from weather, is doing this. The Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, everybody, every agency is pressing this climate agenda. You cannot get away from it. Every scientist in America is funded to do climate change, it seems like. And so it's hard to escape. The media is just fixated on this, and it's because the reason climate is their most important item is that climate is the way that they plan to control all of us. That they can get a grip on the economy. That they don't want us in cars anymore.
Yes.
So they're going to say that, oh well, you guys should you should drive EVs. Of course, no one can really afford EVs, and there's no charging network for it. And so what they're really doing is just taking us out of our cars. They're destroying the electricity grid. The Biden administration has proposed to get rid of all the coal plants, all the gas plants in the 2030s. At the same time, they want to burden the grid with all these EVs. Well, of course, that can't work. And you got to understand, well, why are they doing this? Are they really stupid? No, of course they're not stupid. They have the internet. They're smart people.
Yeah.
This is their plan. Their plan is to destroy our standard of living, to take away our freedoms, to destroy the economy, make people dependent on government. And there you go. That's the end game.
And the more that they can create confusion around this issue and say, look, it's just too complicated for you to understand, the more they can justify that they need to have all the power. I mean, there's an example of this, of course, was what we experienced during the COVID hysteria, as the government assumed all sorts of power unto itself, made all sorts of bold claims that all turned out to be false. And we lived through it. And I'm looking at, there's a piece of audio I have here of a World Economic Forum advisor by the name of Yuval Noah Harari, who suggested recently that COVID was a really useful exercise in the ways that they can now take over the planet, that is, government officials can take over the planet with regards to climate change. Take a listen to this audio.
It's not an extremely deadly virus. It's not the Black Death. And look what it's doing to the world. So now just try to think what will be the implications of a much bigger problem like climate change. Also, conceptually, it shows that, and here I completely agree with you, Rutger, that it shows you that you can change things on a massive scale. That, and again, you can stop all flights. You can lock down entire countries. You can actually do that, and life goes on in some way. And this, I would say, may make us more open to radical ideas about how to deal also with climate change.
Amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
And so he's saying exactly what you just laid out, which is that they're doing this for power.
Yeah, look, I'll just give you 2 data points real quick. At the beginning of COVID, when we did the lockdowns, as soon as they saw that was possible and people weren't going to push back, they started fantasizing, oh, well, we can go from the COVID lockdown into a climate lockdown.
Yes.
And then just a couple weeks ago, on the front page of the New York Times, on the front page above the fold, was a headline that read, "Extreme heat is the new COVID." And that's all you really need to know about the whole thing. It's just an excuse to lock us down.
And the irony of this, you mentioned that even the electric vehicles, they won't be supported, that we don't have the grid to support them. What that also means is that we wouldn't have the grid necessary to support common things already in use, like air conditioning. Air conditioning is the reason people survive hot summers. And there's a lot of death ahead if they get their way.
Well, yeah. So I was just listening to TV this morning, and I understand, there are a lot of grid systems that have issued warnings because of heat waves, and, they can't supply electricity because over the last 10 years, they've been dismantling our grids, replacing reliable wind and solar and nuclear with unreliable solar and wind, and it's making our grid unstable. Now we can't even provide electricity for sure. And then on top of this, there was a Los Angeles Times reporter had this big article last week about how, well, maybe blackouts are something we need to accept to solve the climate crisis. These people are completely nuts.
Yes. And there's another piece that I know you follow more closely than the rest of us do, which is that they'll often tell us about some specific thing happening on our planet that's irreversible. And then when it actually is reversed, meaning things improve, they don't give you the update. So, for instance, the decline of the polar bear was a big thing for a while. Polar bear populations are now flourishing. The Great Barrier Reef was disappearing. Now the Great Barrier Reef is growing back at record levels. And they never give us updates on the things that they were giving us doomsday forecasts about in the first place.
No, that's right. There never was a polar bear crisis. I mean, polar bears were hunted to near extinction by the 1960s, but since hunting restrictions, the polar bear population has bounced back. It's at its highest level, in a century. They're doing fine. Nothing they claim. None of the disasters they claim have happened or will happen have ever come true.
Right.
They're never held accountable for any of their wrong predictions. You're right. They just move on to the next. There's always bad weather someplace. So when one of their claims falls through, well, there's new bad weather tomorrow, so they just jump on that, and it's just endless. And climate is a very politicized, polarizing issue. A lot of the media is now paid by left-wing foundations to promote this. The Associated Press, which, used to be a wire service, just providing hard news. Well, now, it is paid millions of dollars by the likes of the Rockefeller Foundation, left-wing foundation, to propagandize on climate. The Washington Post is paid by corporations and also paid by the Rockefeller Foundation to propagandize on climate. And they're not going to go away. You can't prove them wrong because they're just, they're always onto something new.
Right. And if we go back to the 70s, I think you and I have talked about it before, all the concerns, for instance, about human population growing out of control. That was all used as a predicate for just a massive genocide of humanity. We have lost so many people certainly to abortion, and as far as we can tell, dramatic declination in fertility around the planet. There is, and this is all at the hands of the very people who were scaremongering about population explosion.
Yeah, and I think population reduction really is their end game. Their end game is control, and it's a lot easier to control 2 billion people than 8 billion people. When you look at what they're doing, Paul Ehrlich got the population reduction gang going in the 1960s with his book, Population Bomb. And in that book, Paul Ehrlich claimed that the carrying capacity of the Earth was 1.5 billion to 2 billion people. Well, obviously that was wrong because we have 8 billion people living longer, healthier, wealthier lives than ever. But Paul Ehrlich is still out there, in his 90-something years, talking about how we can't have more than 1.5 to 2 billion people. And when you look at what the agenda is, taking away our energy, destroying our energy economy, producing less food, just in general, making us poorer, reducing our standard of living. All the stuff that took us from 1 billion people before industrialization to 8 billion now, they're taking all that away. I guess you can't build gas chambers anymore, but you can starve people. And I think that's what they plan to do.
So when your plan is anti-human and the dominant system around the planet for governance is democracy, how do those two work together? Because the people will not vote to destroy themselves.
Well, the people are not voting to destroy themselves, but of course, the left lies about everything it's doing. The whole climate agenda is a lie. The agenda is, we're going to make every day just like perfect weather. And of course, they're not doing anything of the sort. And a lot of the people on the left, are on the population control agenda.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people in the middle that just don't know any better. And even I run into conservatives that don't really understand any of this. So it's really easy for them to get elected. Look at Joe Biden.
But in the end,
crazy agenda.
But in the end, though, my point is that simply that democracy will not prevail in the face of this. If the goal is fundamentally, once it's fully realized and fully exposed, they're going to have to go. They're already on the road to full tyranny. There's no way that you could get popular support for this type of anti-human destruction.
No, of course. That's absolutely. People would not vote for this. People need to be lied to, and that's what's going on.
It's pretty awful. Steve Malloy, thank you for tracking the details as always. Really appreciate your time today, sir. They promise they can control the weather. All you got to do is give them more power. That's all you have to do. Kathy calling in from Washington, D.C. now, line 3. Kathy, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yeah, hey, Vince, thank you so much. And in addition, you bringing up the polar bear myth, but we are truly decimating some of our wildlife populations, like the condor, I understand, out in the West, is being decimated by the wind farms, including some of our bald eagles, our hawks, our large birds of prey. 558,000 birds have flown into these windmills. And then on the East Coast, we have the whale population beaching themselves as they swim by New Jersey.
Yeah, you got to break a few whales to save a climate, apparently. They're killing tons of whales and condors, and all these birds are dying for no reason. And they tell us it's going to save humanity. There's like an Aztec principle to it, isn't there, Kathy? They have to sacrifice creatures, and they think that'll change the weather patterns.
Absolutely, and I keep envisioning that I'm going to show up and talk to AOC and have a nice picture book. And here's the pretty picture book of all the animals you are responsible for killing.
Yes.
But I don't.
Yep.
I don't know if I can.
It's unbelievable, and the all the stuff that they advance is so unsightly. The stuff that's killing the animals, it's so unsightly. These windmills. I was telling people, I was in Indiana earlier this week. I landed at the airport in Indianapolis. Around the airport, there are vast fields that are covered in solar panels. No vegetation, just disgusting metal solar panels. And I was like, really? So to save the environment, you have to make it look like crap, Kathy.
Exactly. That's another point. And where are they manufactured? China. With parts from Africa, child labor, slave labor, and who's to say that the Chinese haven't embedded surveillance equipment in these solar panels?
Well, they usually do. That's kind of par for the course. Kathy, thank you. What a great call. And that's right. So Kathy and I, we're the real environmentalists here. We care about the whales and the condors and the animals. We don't want to pollute the earth. We don't want to be digging up these minerals and destroying everything. We just want good old-fashioned clean energy, and we want humans to flourish. Is that so much to ask? Turns out it's a lot to ask. If you ask the United Nations or the World Economic Forum or the Biden White House, they're not for those things. Coming up, speaking of things they're not for free speech either. We've got more information about the ways that the Biden administration has been censoring your speech and your knowledge. It's all ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show. Well, good afternoon to you. Great to have you with us. It is 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. We've got a lot more coming up for you today as we chat with Ted Harvey. That'll be at 5 o'clock. He's the chairman for the committee to defeat the president. And Cheryl Chumley will join us at 5:30, the excellent Cheryl Chumley from the Washington Times, as we get into the Biden Justice Department dropping new charges on the maintenance guy at Mar-a-Lago. How nice. You can join us, as always, at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Now, one of the things that we are keeping an eye on is the amount of censorship that the Biden administration has been doing. We've got the Facebook files. I was sharing some of that yesterday with you. Facebook Files Part 1, that's from Jim Jordan. The House Judiciary Committee has been threatening to hold Mark Zuckerberg and company in contempt of Congress, and they finally decided to turn over some documents to Congress that revealed all of the immense pressure that the Biden administration was placing on Facebook in order to censor you and get rid of content and prevent you from seeing things, including jokes. They were censoring memes. Stuff like people were posting memes about future class action lawsuits if you were forced to get the vaccine. And Facebook was censoring this stuff at the behest of the White House. And the White House was sending it, explicitly choosing things like that and saying, you need to censor this and this and this. You have a Tucker Carlson video. The Facebook fact checked that they couldn't find anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with this video. But the White House said, you need to censor it. So Facebook suppressed the video and decreased its reach by 50%, decreased its ability to go viral by 50% to prevent people from seeing it. Again, under pressure from the White House. And that was part 1. Well, today we get part 2, and as a part of that part 2, Jim Jordan posted a link to a Wall Street Journal piece that was just posted this morning. 5:30 this morning, this went live. And the headline is Facebook bowed to White House pressure, comma, removed COVID posts. Dateline Washington. Facebook removed content related to COVID-19 in response to pressure from the Biden administration, including posts claiming the virus was man-made, according to internal company communications viewed by the Wall Street Journal. The emails show Facebook executives discussing how they managed users' posts about the origins of a pandemic that the administration was seeking to control. Quote, "Can someone quickly remind me why we were removing, rather than demoting or labeling, claims that COVID is man-made?" End quote, asked Nick Clegg, the company's president of global affairs, in a July 2021 email to colleagues. Quote, "We were under pressure from the administration and others to do more," end quote, responded a Facebook vice president in charge of content policy, speaking of the Biden administration. Quote, "We shouldn't have done it." End quote. All right, so Nick Clegg is an executive at Facebook, and he wanted to know why we're removing all of this stuff saying that COVID came from a lab. And one of the other Facebook guys says, the White House told us to. We probably shouldn't have done it, but we did. Wow. Okay. So here you have Joe Biden censoring what you're allowed to see. And it turns out, of course, that the lab leak theory ended up being as close to the correct one as we're even aware. All of the evidence, the evidence is overwhelmingly that this came from a lab in Wuhan, funded by the U.S. government, by the way. And yet that was shut down on Facebook for a long time. And the Biden White House was shutting it down. The discussion took place 3 months after Facebook, which is owned by Meta Platforms. This is an important detail. It took place 3 months after Facebook decided to stop banning posts asserting that COVID-19 was man-made or manufactured in light of increasing debate about the virus's origin. So this goes back to that famous reversal. Because Facebook had stopped you from talking about this throughout the pandemic. And then, as Joe Biden was coming into office, they started to lighten up a bit, and they said, okay, well, there's all this evidence. And this is only because the New York Times and a couple of other mainstream news outlets, these leftist corporate news outlets, started entertaining the idea that it may have come from a lab, right? So that was the moment where Facebook said, okay, you can talk about it a little if you like. We'll stop banning that particular line of conversation. But it wasn't good enough for the Biden administration. They came flying in and said, no, you do have to keep banning this. And so Facebook was quietly doing it. They claimed that they had reversed their policy when, in fact, they hadn't really reversed their policy. They were doing what the Biden White House wanted, which was shutting down conversations about the lab origin of COVID. The Wall Street Journal continues. The email, the one I just quoted, and a number of other such internal company communications were obtained by the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee, which has been investigating what Republican lawmakers say is the Biden administration's improper efforts to censor American speech on social media about COVID and other topics. Yeah, it's not just Republicans saying that. It is objectively improper. The White House says its discussions were aimed at promoting the adoption of vaccines and other public health goals. Oh, shut up. Our discussions were aimed at promoting the vaccine. No. That's called more speech, and that's not what you were doing. You were restricting speech on social media. You were stopping people from joking about the vaccine, criticizing the vaccine, talking about the origins of COVID, talking about the efficacy of those stupid masks that didn't work, that you forced everybody into. Quote, we have consistently made it clear that we believe social media companies have a critical responsibility to take account of the effects of their platforms that they have on the American people while making independent decisions about the contents of their platforms, said White House Press Secretary Coringe at a Thursday briefing. Asked to comment for this article later Thursday, a White House spokesperson pointed to those comments. Listen to her last dumb answer on this. Just take that as the quote. Facebook has long said that its content moderation decisions are independent and not made with regard to politics. Of course, they're lying. A spokesman declined to comment for this article. Notice that Facebook has a spokesman and the White House has a spokesperson. I love that they're so scared to admit that they're men or women that they have to call themselves spokespeople. Facebook, even Facebook is not that crazy. A spokesman declined to comment for the article. The emails viewed by the Wall Street Journal, which haven't been previously reported, date to the spring and summer of 2021 when the White House was mounting a nationwide push for Americans to get vaccinated for COVID-19. Yeah, remember that push? Do you remember when the Biden administration was accusing the, quote, unvaccinated of killing people? Do you remember this? They said, you're killing people if you don't get the jab. If you don't do the government-required dance, you're a murderer. Part of that push included a public and private campaign to get Facebook to more aggressively police vaccine-related content. Administration officials had come to believe that many Americans were hesitant to get vaccines because of false information they saw on Facebook. Quote, they're killing people. President Biden said that July. There's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Remember that? Never mind that we eventually found out that COVID was running more rampant among the, quote, vaccinated than anybody else. The tongue lashing caused Facebook to reevaluate its policies about COVID-19 content. Discussions that involved high-level company officials, including Clegg and then Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, according to the emails the Journal saw. Following the president's killing people comment, the Facebook vice president circulated a memo assessing the difference between Facebook's content policies and the Biden administration's demands, some of which the company appeared ready to push back on. Quote, there is likely a significant gap between what the White House would like us to remove and what we're comfortable removing, said the Facebook vice president. As one example, the executive listed the White House's desire for the company to take action against, ready, humorous or satirical content. So the White House was placing pressure on Facebook to remove jokes, mockery, humor, parody, because if there's one thing a tyrant can't stand, it's jokes. Jokes, they said, that, quote, suggested that the vaccines aren't safe. So any satirical content that say, don't get the jab, or made it out to be bad for you or whatever. Funny stuff. The White House wanted removed. The White House, these tyrants, these fascists. The White House has previously indicated it thinks humor should be removed if it is premised on the vaccine having side effects. So let me just envision something. So, you know, maybe you see a picture where you get the jab and then you grow another head or something. The White House wanted that removed. The White House was demanding Facebook remove anything that made a joke out of the side effects you could get from getting the jab. Let's see. Clegg writing in a subsequent email that he couldn't see Mark Zuckerberg in a million years, quote, being comfortable with removing that, and I wouldn't recommend it. In some of the emails, Facebook executives expressed concern that removing posts in which Americans expressed hesitation about getting vaccinated could actually make them less likely to get a shot. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Why can't these idiots see this, by the way? If the whole point was to make everyone get the jab, why would you make them more skeptical by removing their Facebook posts? Like, I don't think I'm getting the jab. The government has removed your post. Like, that's not pushing me into CVS. Like, hey, jab time. No. Facebook officials appeared to feel pressure to address the White House's concerns. As Clegg prepared to meet the U.S. Surgeon General about vaccine misinformation in late July of 2021, he emailed colleagues, quote, my sense is that our current course, in effect, explaining ourselves more fully, but not shifting on where we draw the lines, is a recipe for protracted and increasing acrimony. In other words, this isn't helping. The White House is trying to crush us. That's what he's saying. Quote, given the bigger fish we have to fry with the administration, data flows, etc., that doesn't seem a great place for us to be. So grateful for any further creative thinking on how we can be responsive to their concerns. Okay, so what you're hearing in these emails, these Facebook people are emailing, is they're feeling the coercion of the White House. They're scared to tick them off. To tick off Joe Biden and his merry band of idiots. They don't want to do that. They're scared of what it could mean for them for any number of reasons. The Wall Street Journal continues and says that Facebook at the time was hoping to facilitate an agreement between U.S. and European officials allowing user data to flow across the Atlantic in compliance with privacy laws. By August of 2021, Facebook's executives were emailing each other about new plan changes to their COVID content policies. One change increased the punishments faced by users who ran afoul of content policies and had accounts on both Facebook and Instagram. The company, for example, had previously removed the Instagram account of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a vaccine skeptic now turned presidential candidate. Let me pause on that for a moment. Vaccine skeptic is not Robert Kennedy Jr. I guess one of the things that he's claimed, he's like, look, I'm not anti-vax. I keep saying I'm anti-vax. He says, I've got plenty of vaccines. I think vaccines are great, but some of them I'm concerned about. So I guess, does that make him a vaccine skeptic? I guess he's a critical thinker. I think that's what they're trying to say. His Facebook account hadn't faced the same punishment because it hadn't posted the same content, the emails show. Under the new policy, Kennedy's Facebook account wouldn't be recommended to other users. So they would punish him across all of their platforms, in other words. Jim Jordan, quoted by the Wall Street Journal, said that, quote, these documents begin to reveal the pressure that Facebook and other social media companies were under to alter their content moderation policies and remove protected speech to appease the federal government, particularly the Biden White House. Okay, so that's just part one of some of the details we learned today. Jim Jordan expands on this today on Twitter. He says that in the summer of 2021, the White House was mounting that nationwide push for Americans to get vaccinated, and they were waging a secret campaign to get Facebook to censor content, including true information, true things. Jim Jordan says that, of course, this wasn't the Biden administration's first pressure campaign. And he goes on to detail some of the stuff you've already heard, that they shouldn't have been doing it. The Facebook people are saying, we're under pressure. The administration's making us shut down examinations into the COVID lab leak theory. We shouldn't have removed it, but we did. Yeah. The Biden administration officials claim that many Americans were hesitant to get vaccines because of true information that they saw on Facebook. And so actually what we have here is Jim Jordan basically reiterating a lot of the points that's in the Wall Street Journal piece. But you had the White House and the Surgeon General's office mounting a pressure campaign on this company and what is a Facebook executive to think? What are they to think? Any of these social media companies. We've got the full weight of the federal government ready to bear down on us unless we act here. Unless we censor the American public. And so yet more evidence is coming out on that subject and the way that the Biden administration has been censoring you and your friends and your knowledge. And this, to repeat myself, as I said yesterday, this scandal alone is enough to impeach Joe Biden. This scandal alone, running afoul of the First Amendment, shutting down conversations, and you are, for what it's worth, you're allowed to spread false information if you'd like. You're allowed to express false things to your friends and your family. But this is about true stuff. This is people posting true information about how they feel about the vaccine, jokes about the vaccine, the side effects that they're experiencing, whatever. The White House wanted to shut that down, and Facebook was dutifully doing it. That's a real scandal. That's tyranny. It's just wild. Speaking of Robert F. Kennedy, he's a candidate for president, despite what Democrats want. He's a candidate for president. He's out there running around campaigning, and he filed a request with the Biden administration that today he announced was denied. Why it should have been fulfilled and what the Biden administration is up to here, I'm going to get into the details. That's ahead. It's 4:51. Yeah, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is one of the top polling candidates in the Democrat primary. In fact, he's number 2. He's behind Joe Biden. Constant double digits, somewhere in the 20s. I mean, a lot of people support this guy on the Democrat side. And the more support you have as a candidate, the more of a justification for why you might need Secret Service protection. That is, that you should be considered seriously. And not just that, the Kennedy family, if you haven't heard, has a history of being assassinated. That seems like a big problem. So, and Robert F. Kennedy has a lot of people on the left who hate him. They absolutely despise him. So you put all that together, and that's a recipe for him needing protection. So Robert Kennedy did file a request with the Secret Service asking them for what they refer to as a pro forma protection request. And he was just denied. After 88 days of no response, he tweeted this morning, and after several follow-ups by our campaign, the Biden administration just denied our request. Secretary Mayorkas saying to Kennedy, quote, "I have determined that Secret Service protection for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not warranted at this time," end quote. Kennedy says, "Our campaign's request included a 67-page report from the world's leading protection firm detailing unique and well-established security and safety risks aside from commonplace death threats." Our WMAL colleague, Dan Bongino, saying today, former Secret Service agent, if you didn't know, he said, quote, "He's not wrong. I've worked with Candidate Nominee Operations Section, that's CNOS, I guess, protective details for candidates with a far smaller campaign footprint than RFK. No way should he be denied U.S. Secret Service protection. This appears to be a political decision by DHS rather than a security-focused one." So there you go. So Robert Kennedy, whose father was assassinated in 1968, whose uncle was, of course, famously assassinated, whose family seems to be constantly in peril, who has a huge chunk of support on the left among Democrats, can't get Secret Service protection because Joe Biden refuses to give it to him. They don't want to, and you know why, too? It's entirely because they don't want to legitimize his candidacy. They don't want to give him the appearance of being a presidential candidate, which would include a Secret Service detail. They don't want people to look at him and see Secret Service around him and think, well, maybe he should be president. He kind of looks like one. He's even got the Secret Service detail. That's the last thing that Biden world wants. So now we're left with this. Biden refuses to protect a presidential candidate whose family members are constantly assassinated. That's the summary of today's events. Robert F. Kennedy, you're on your own, apparently. No help from Joe Biden. They don't want to dignify your very existence. Coming up here on the Vince Coglianese Show, we're going to be joined by Ted Harvey. He's with the Committee to Defeat the President. He'd like to get rid of Joe Biden. And Cheryl Chumley joins us as well, as we'll talk about the Justice Department coming down on the maintenance guy at Mar-a-Lago. It's all ahead.